Hey cutie. Welcome back or welcome to my channel if you're new. My name is Laura. Hi, hello, welcome. My new tripod is set up actually right now and it's a lot further away, so we're kind of, it's the same filming setup but just like a little bit different, so hopefully it's not too distracting having it just a bit different. I don't know how else to say it. Today it's all about my favorite eyeshadow per palette, and I'm really excited about this, especially now that I've actually used every single shade of eyeshadow in my palettes. I actually did that a few weeks ago, a month and a half ago at this point, maybe 2 months. I don't remember. It's really put into perspective what my favorite eyeshadows really are. I have gone through every single one of my eyeshadow palettes and I have hand selected the favorite shade in each palette, and honestly some of my selections have actually shocked myself, but I think it's just my preferences change as the seasons go by. My preferences have also changed as I've been completing and using my No Pan Left Behind, my Pan That palette, and my eye bank. It's really kind of put into perspective different things, ways I like to use eyeshadows, and I've really grown to know and enjoy my collection a lot. So I feel really excited to share my favorites per palette, but if you are not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing before moving on. I'd love to have you as a cutie too. And if you like favorites videos, shop my stash, project panning, get ready with me's, makeup in general, I think you'd love it here in this space. I have every single eyeshadow palette written down with its eyeshadow shade. I wrote it all down. I like to be prepared for videos. So I have all of my eyeshadows by alphabetical order, unless they came into my collection later, like after I had already written it down, because I write things in like a hardcover book. I started things off with my Adept palettes. I have 3 Adept palettes, and I'm gonna start in alphabetical order of the palette names. Starting things off with the Heather Austin palette. This is a stunning palette. I am a little intimidated by this color story, so I have been trying to gravitate and make myself use this a little bit more. My favorite shade in this palette, though, is the shade Austin. It's just so darn pretty. It has such a different reflect. It goes from green to gold to pink. So pretty. Oh my gosh, it's just so gorgeous. I really love that shade so much. Then moving to the Ninhydrin palette. This is another one that is a little bit intimidating for me, but a little less so than the Heather Austin, even though this has more blue shades that I don't reach for. But my favorite shade in this palette is ACI 18, this pink. This actually surprised me. I was torn between this shade here and ACI 25, the green here, but just the base tone on this is just a slightly deeper, and it doesn't have, I just like the way that this one looks on my eye a lot. My last Adept Cosmetics palette is my Plain Jane Remastered. This is the one that really, ooh man, we're really reflective over here. This is the one that really started it all. This is the one that I saw my friend Dana on Instagram, Eyeshadow Junkie at Heart. She always does looks using her original Plain Jane palette, and it really made me want to bite the bullet and get this palette. Even though there are some shades in here that intimidate me, I'm learning to like them more. But my favorite shade in this palette is actually this one over here, ACI 17. It is so unique. It's like gold, it's green, it's peach, it's pink. It's so pretty. So you can see the difference between. The only thing that I don't like about the shimmers is the ones that are a little bit more malleable. They have a little bit more of an oily base to them, so they do have a less longevity on my eyelids, which definitely frustrates me because they are not inexpensive palettes, so I just wish they lasted a little bit longer on the eyes before creasing. Moving down to my B brands, BH Cosmetics is the only brand I have a palette from that starts with B. There are brands on my radar that I definitely want, but I only own the Avocado Toast. This was a gift from Haley. This is what it looks like if you're unfamiliar. I'm sure you've seen it time and time again. My favorite shade in this palette is Lemon Pepper. It used to be Haze over here. I was torn between Lemon Pepper and Avocado, but I just really like green and gold shades a little bit more than pink shades. I just think they look so good on my skin. Then we go to my C brands, and I have Clionadh first. This is the Dragon Fruit palette. This packaging annoys me. I have the original packaging that was that hard, like acrylic, and I feel like acrylic in general just dries out super quick and packaging tends to break. It happens with my Natasha Denona. It happens with this one. But in this palette, I had a hard time because there are so many great shades within this palette. Bubbles up here, Dragantini, was that Dragantini? Yeah, Dragantini over there, Fruit Fizz, Effervescent, Infusion, so many great shades in this palette. I did end up going kind of out of my norm, and I did say Infusion is my favorite shade in this palette, and I feel like that has been pretty consistent in most of these favorites videos that I've filmed in the past that I had this palette in my collection. Oh, I love that shade so much. I don't reach for it that much, and I feel like it's just because the packaging on this palette is broken, that I have like a mental block of wanting to reach for this. Then I have my Colourpop palettes, and because I've been doing a pan that palette, focusing on a rotational style using my Colourpop palettes, I am not going to open these up and share what my favorites are, because you've seen these palettes time and time again if you've been keeping up with that series. If not, what are you doing? I am doing fabulous in it. I'm just going to toot my own horn there. In my Going Coconuts palette, I have this. I know I'm not going to share. It is the darkest shimmer in that palette. I said was my favorite in that palette. It is the shade Cocoa Crush. Reason why I love this shade in particular is just all of the different dimensional shimmer colors that run throughout this shade. That one's so pretty. It looks a lot deeper in the pan too, but you can really sheer it out and just make it look really beautiful. Oh, it's just so pretty. Bare Necessities palette. This one surprised me, but whenever I used to talk about this palette, I had a shimmer or a metallic shade that was my favorite, and as I've been using this palette more, I've been wanting to gravitate towards a certain shade, but I've been telling myself no because it already had pan in it. That's the shade Spree. It's actually one of their sequin shadows. It's a matte with glitter. So this is that shade Spree, and I'm just going to swatch it underneath. It's just such a rich version of this burgundy kind of shade. Then in my Pretty Guardian palette, the Sailor Moon collab, this guy here, I actually went with a matte shadow in this because I feel like in years past, I always selected Luna as my favorite shade in this palette. However, as I've been panning Luna, I've been realizing how much I appreciated other shades within that palette. I have my E palette next, and I have Ensley Rain Cosmetics. I want to get more Ensley Rain Cosmetics palettes, but I'm telling myself I'm content with my collection. However, Ensley Rain, I have the Flower Moon palette. This just spoke to me. It absolutely spoke to me. This is such a beautiful color story. I am typically someone that is always drawn to green shadows, and I love all of these green shades in this palette, but that's not the one I selected for my favorite, and it really did shock me. I went with Freesia up here. I have grown to love these shades so much on my eyes. These might be my favorite type of eyeshadow color. I ended up finishing a shade out of the Menagerie Feral palette that was very similar to this. Moving to my F palettes, I have a stack of Fantasy Cosmetica palettes. You'll actually see another Fantasy Cosmetica palette later on in this video that I got later. But anyway, my first palette is the Druid. This was the first one, the one that set the love affair off, and I will say I did get all of these palettes sent to me for free in PR, but all of these opinions are my own, and you will see there are definitely some favorites. The Druid palette, I have the old packaging. I love the new packaging, but I have the old one and I'm totally fine with it. I clearly love this palette a lot. There's a lot of pan in this palette. My old favorite shade used to be this green one. My new favorite shade, this one, the one with the biggest pan. I fell in love with this shade so much. This is what I was wearing in my Pan That Palette update. This was what was all over my lid on top of a like maroon base. It is one of my, like, I call it my grungy Christmas type shade. I can wear it with a red base and put this on and it looks like I have just the epitome of Christmas. I love that there's a bit of a purple shift to it. It's just so pretty. I just like that shade so much. Then I go down to the Rogue palette. This is probably one of my least favorite Fantasy Cosmetica palettes, but I do really love the shade Trickster. This one up here, I think it's just so beautiful. It's just so beautiful. These are more of that like squishy kind of formula, so they're a little bit easier to hit pan on, but it's just so pretty. It's kind of a similar vibe. Then I have the Fighter palette, and this was one of the more boring color stories, but there's something about these shimmers that are just so special in this palette, and my favorite in here is Victory. And again, it's because there's so many dimensional shimmer and glitter particles within that shade that make that just look so wet and so unique when you put it on the eye. It's so pretty. Again, that would be a good one to top something like that over top of it too. Last Fantasy Cosmetica palette we have to talk about for a little bit is the Warlock palette. This is a very bright, very exciting color story, but this shade Arcanum is my favorite. It is a flakier formula, so if you don't like those, you might not like this. I just like that flakier formula because typically it's more glittery, more impactful, and in my opinion, just more beautiful. Next, I have my Ice Cream Dream palette by Glam Light. Man, that took me a minute for me to realize what that name was. And there's a lot of beautiful shades in this palette. I feel like my favorite is gonna surprise most people in this palette. My favorite shade is Cookie Monster, actually. I just love this type of blue in general. I either like mints or like periwinkles. Those are some of my favorites. I feel like that might be a 90s trait, but I love the shade Cookie Monster. I love to pile this on top of a shade like the Lunar Landing eyeliner that I have. It looks really pretty with this layered on top as a nice base. And it's so pretty. Then I have a stack of my remaining Kaleidos palettes in front of me. I only have the Futurism series. There is part of me that definitely wants to dabble in some of the other palettes that they've launched, but honestly, nothing that they've been launching lately has been really catching my eye. So starting things off with the Sci-Fi Green palette, it is 6 pans. All of these are 6 pans. My favorite is my favorite that's been for a long time. That is the shade Glamora there. That is the only shimmer with pan in it. And it is just such a beautiful shade. I really love olive tones a lot. They are one of my favorite types of eyeshadows to put on my eyes. Then I have the VR Neon palette. It is a very bright palette. It's a very condensed rainbow palette. And this is what she looks like. Absolutely beautiful. I feel like I used to say this shade because it was so unique in my collection. My absolute favorite is Glitch. I love this shade. It's like a radioactive green, an acid green, green apple kind of green. Man, a look using these 4 shades actually would be really pretty. It is pretty unique in my collection as well. I don't have that all over the place. That's why I tend to want to hold on to the VR Neon palette, even though this is not a palette I reach for. Again, I think it's because of the size of it. Then an absolute stunning palette that I should shame myself for not reaching for more often is the Sashimi City palette. This was a gift from Haley as well, and it's just so stunning. I want to say it was in 2 rotations of pan those eyeshadows, but did I only hit pan in that one? I guess. My favorite is still the favorite that was. It is Penthouse, the one with pan in it. Although Ginger, what is that? Pink Ginger is one of those shades that I love a lot. The like gold neutral base with that really pink reflect. But Penthouse, out of the 2, it just reigns supreme. I love these kinds of shades so much. As we can see, I have a type. It kind of goes in theme with all of those other shades. Moving to my M's, I have Menagerie, my Feral palette next. This is a 12 pan palette. Honestly, not my favorite color story. I did not buy this. This was a gift from Haley. My favorite color was Wolfling. It was the one that started my love affair with those golds with pink reflect. That was my favorite, but moving on to my new favorite in what's remaining is Canis Lupus. It's just a nice neutral brown. Again, this is kind of a palette that I'm not too keen on, but it's like sentimental, so I don't really want to get rid of it, kind of thing. Then I have my Morphe Sour Patch Kids, the Sour Then Sweet palette. This was a gift from my husband. Super sweet of him. This is just a super rainbow palette. I did scrape out a couple shades that caused some eye irritation, or like in this case, I just wasn't into it. That one caused some eye irritation. My favorite shade in here, the one I always want to reach for, is Watermelon Woe. It's so pretty. It's definitely like a neon coral. It's just very stunning. I really, really enjoy this shade. Maybe I should have gone with a shimmer, but I truly always want to reach for that shade when I go into that palette. It's just so much fun. Before we get to my massive stack of Natasha Denona palettes, we get to talk about my one Nabla palette, the Dreamy 2. This actually surprises me how much I like this color story. I bought it when I was really into it, and then I got very much out of like my neutral realm, and now I'm super into this again. My absolute favorite shade in this palette is the shade Dionysus. I definitely thought about a shimmer, but whenever I go into this, I really want to wear this shade again. One of Nabla's like creamier formulas, although it is starting to dry out and become just kind of a powder finish. But this used to be one of those kind of cream to matte finish kind of shades. It's so pretty. Actually, it would go really well. I could make a look with those 3 as my like base kind of shades and create something really pretty, I think, actually. I have a large stack of Natasha Denona palettes to get through, and starting with the behemoth of all behemoths, this is my Natasha Denona Green Brown palette. I love this palette. This is one that I was constantly in the forefront of my mind before I bit the bullet and bought it. My old favorite shade used to be this shade, Always. I always loved this shade. Now, after using this palette and I think just the season of life that I'm in, my current favorite shade is this shade down here, Cool Bronze, which I was not expecting to love that shade as much as I do. It's just kind of a basic bronze shade, nothing super duper exciting, except it's so pretty. My hand is a little bit stained, but that is not going to stop us from continuing on. So I have my Natasha Denona Gold palette first, and mine will look a bit different because I did swap out 2 or 3 shades in this palette with some warmer tones, so I swapped out that and that, so we don't even count those. Doesn't matter though, because my favorite is this shade. That is Lime Chrome. It's one of those like orangey bases with a super green gold flip to it. Absolutely stunning. Love that kind of shade so much. Then Natasha Denona's Safari palette. This is a all matte palette. I have been really doing my darndest to reach for this more. I did film a 2 Looks 1 palette relatively recently with this palette. My absolute favorite shade in this palette is not the one that has pan, but instead is this really beautiful terracotta coral kind of shade. That is Amara. It's just a really stunning kind of shade. It's like a very blushy terracotta. This is something that would make a really nice base shade for lime chrome also. Then I have the Sunrise palette that has kind of a similar shade color story. It's almost as if this palette is inspired by the shade Amara with kind of the tones that are in it. But my favorite shade in this palette is the shade Awakening up here. It's just so unique. It's, again, one that is more of like a mauve taupe. But the thing that really sets it off from other shades that are similar in my collection is the fact that it has so many different shimmer glitters running throughout it. So it really does look just so special when you put it on the lid. I have my retro palettes next. The retro regular, the mauve toned one, is first on my list. That is this beauty here. There are a ton of cream to matte shades in this palette. However, that's not the one I went with. I ended up going with Psychedelic, the most beautiful shimmer in this palette. Again, it's one that has so many different reflex in it. So I had to go with it. I just had to. So this is the shade Psychedelic here. I know, a lot more cool tones, like sunset kind of vibes. Retro Glam here. This is the like muted down red-green palette. So really, really beautiful. I surprisingly said my favorite shade in this palette is the shade Oscar up here. It's just a nice neutral shade, but it looks so good. No matter what I do with this shade, it always looks beautiful. This is Oscar. It almost has like a khaki undertone to it, but it's just super, super pretty. I feel like that might be a good shade for my 2 Looks 1 single. I have the Natasha Denona My Dream palette, which is a little bit deeper than I would actually like in a dream palette of mine. But my favorite shade in here is this beautiful shimmer shade there called Thrill. I think it's because it has that kind of similar pink gold reflect, which is just what I've been really wanting to wear recently with like the whole year. This is kind of the shade I've been really wanting to wear. Yucca palette, or Yucca, however you say it. I knew immediately what shade was going to be number 1 in this palette, but we're going with Plantasia. This is so beautiful. So many of the shimmers look similar. Like when you really tilt it, it gets that reddy kind of purple. Then my Zendo palette, which I know is that you either love this palette or you hate this palette. This is another one that has a ton of cream to matte shades in it. I believe there were 4 cream to mattes and I hit pan in 3 of them. But I did go with Breath because it is the one with the biggest pan. It is the one that I've organically just wanted to reach for while I was panning other shades. And this is something that I do want to see myself finishing at some point before it completely dries off. This is Fresh. It's so pretty. It made such a wonderful layering shade when I was using a matte cream eyeshadow. I could layer that on top of it. What are you, Sugar Drizzle? Yeah, I have my Sugar Drizzle palettes first, and then I have a Sugarpill palette after that. But I am starting with my Little Baby 6-Pan Pickle palette. This is a green and purple, really fun palette. Now you'd think I'd pick Dill Pickles, but actually in this palette, my favorite is In a Pickle. So it really can zest up a neutral look without being too much and like overboard with green. On Top of the Mountain and Beneath the Stars, this is technically a face highlight palette, but I bought it with the intention of it being an eyeshadow palette, so I count it in my eyeshadows. My favorite shade in this palette is the one I panned, which is the shade Moonlit Sky. It just has a really nice mint kind of shift to it, and I think it just goes, again, really well with so much. It's almost like a gold mint. My last Sugar Drizzle Polish palette is the Sugar Dreams. Really fun all shimmer palette here. And there's a lot of really fun, unique shades in this palette, but I did say my favorite is the shade Shooting Star. Reason being because it's a really light baby pink base. It's almost translucent. It blends really well into my skin tone at least, and then just leaves me with that really fun, really unique reflect to it. Then I have my Sugarpill Fun Size palette, this little tiny itty bitty baby. I love this palette. I think this is so stunning. I also love the periwinkle in this palette. There's just something, when a palette has a periwinkle, I tend to really want to use it because it's so unique and it's one of my favorite types of colors. And you don't see it too often in, I think, the makeup space. I have a couple Too Faced palettes that we're going to go over next, and we'll start things off with the Maple Syrup Pancakes palette. This was the holiday release from, oh man, I want to say 2 years ago. This really just called my name. I loved the pancakes. I thought that was so cute. It is like syrup scented is what they say. I don't know about that, but these greens are super unique to a Too Faced holiday palette. I like those shades, but Get Sticky, this like very boring shade, is so pretty. I feel so gorgeous whenever I wear that on the lid. I just feel really put together and really pretty, and it's so gorgeous. Pinker Times Ahead, on the other hand, I knew exactly what shade I was going to pull, and it's the shade that I always want to reach for when I dip into here, and it's very surprising, and you might not guess it, but it's the blue. I never reach for blue eyeshadows, but there's something about this one in particular because it's almost like that iridescent kind of shade. It almost has a little bit of a blue shift, or a purple shift, excuse me, to it. It is so pretty. And kicking the next section of palettes off, I have Unearthly Cosmetics here. Actually, all of these might be discontinued at this point. I'm not sure. Anyway, I have All I Ever Wanted Volume 1. I did scrape 3 shades out that I was just not interested in. And honestly, my favorite shade is Sphinx here. And it's actually housed in this palette right now. So I'm going to just swatch it out because it is still in my collection. It is a beautiful coral with like green blue reflect in it. I did some makeup surgery. A shade that's in this palette now currently, it would be Amalthea. All I Ever Wanted Volume 2. This is arguably my favorite of the two just because there's more greens, there's more yellows, there's more wearable shades to me in this. There's also a lot of different formulas in this palette. My favorite in this palette though is Desdemona here. It is a mint with a ultraviolet blue shift, and it is so pretty. Stunning, stunning, stunning. It just has an undertone that's a little bit trickier to work with because I don't reach for a lot of, it's almost like a gray mint. Then the Leather and Lace palette is this one here. This is a huge palette for 12 shadows. I really do like the shade Chantilly up here. However, this one down here, I'm going to butcher the name. I want to say it's French, Pont d'Esprit, maybe, d'Esprit, I don't know. Poorly planned and didn't look up pronunciation on that. But that is the shade in the palette, the Orange Shimmer. It does have green reflect to it. After that, I did have my Natasha Denona little minis. There's actually one more Natasha Denona 5-pan, like large 5-pan palette that I have. However, I'm not counting it within this because it's all random shades from like assorted palettes. So it's a total Franken palette of random shades. So I feel like it's not worth talking about. At least these 2 palettes have original shades in it. So my mini nude palette here, we're only going to talk about the original shades, which are this matte, and this shimmer. Out of those 3, my favorite is the lighter, more camel matte called Coin with a Q. It is ultra blendable. It is very, very creamy, very soft to the touch, and really goes with everything. Then I have a large 5-pan palette. This is the Camel palette. This was a gift from Josh for my birthday one year. And this is another one where I like the mattes more than the shimmers in this. So out of the 3 matte shades in this palette, I just went with the middle one, the one that clearly has, to me, I mean, I can see. There's clearly more usage in it because there is more wear and tear in the pan of eyeshadow. Definitely different than the one from the mini nude. I have my last 4 palettes stacked in front of me. I am so excited to wrap this up. I've been talking for so long. I am kicking it off with the Moon Dust palette. This was Urban Decay's holiday release last year. They released 2 palettes, the pink version and then a silver version. I got the pink version. I was not interested in the silver version. I am going with the cult classic shade that everyone loves out of this palette as my favorite, and that is Space Cowboy. Oh, it is so pretty. A little spoiler, but I actually did end up buying the new Urban Decay palette, the star one from Ulta's website. The star shape is kind of atrocious. It's fun, don't get me wrong, but I feel like storing it's going to be a nightmare. That is Space Cowboy. It's so shiny. It's so fun. I think that's an incredible shade. Then another very expensive thing in my collection that I definitely need to use more often, my Pat McGrath. It's the Star Wars collection. I couldn't say no to this when she re-released the Star Wars packaging. It is the Midnight Sun palette though. So not the palette I would have necessarily bought if I were gonna buy one based on color story. This was solely a packaging purpose. And I'm happy I bought this though. This is a really beautiful palette. It is staple for fall, which I do actually like the shades in this. I used this one in my Pan That palette underneath the transformation shade that we talked about earlier. It's just some of the tones in here are a little deeper, so they make really good layering shades. If I put this on and then put something extra fun and sparkly on top, I can get a lot of good use out of this. But right now is this palette's time to shine, and I need to use this more. All that yammering on to say my favorite shade in this palette is Astral Solstice, the most blinding, beautiful, wet shimmer. It's just a wet eyeshadow. It's so beautiful. I don't mean wet eyeshadow literally. I mean, it just makes anything underneath it. Your skin just looks wet and beautiful and just, it's so pretty. It's so shiny. I have my last Fantasy Cosmetica palette in front of me. This is the Wizard palette. I think this was the last one that they sent me before I think I'm off their PR list. This is so pretty. It's definitely periwinkles, blues, and then I love the yellows. My favorite shade in the palette, I went with Meteor Storm, that very center yellow that has really blue, beautiful reflect in it. It's so pretty. It's definitely one that I like to reach for the most when I reach into that palette. Very similar to Pink Ginger from the Kaleidos palette. Then one that I bought in June, and I actually have used every single shade in this palette, which makes me very happy, is the Moon Shroom palette by Lunar Beauty. The packaging is so much fun. Can we pick my favorite? Do you guys know already? There's a lot of yellows in here. My favorite is this out of the box shade. It is so out of like the realm of this palette, but it is so pretty and fun. More true to tone back here. It is a very pastel purple leaning periwinkle. It is so pretty. We'll swatch it right here, I guess. It's so much fun. It's one of the best formulas of that I've tried in my collection so far. I haven't actually swatched these all side by side yet, so I'm gonna set the camera up a different angle. We're gonna do a top down angle while I swatch all these palettes out on my arm. I'm gonna say goodbye to you now as I'm face to face. I will see you guys later. Bye-bye. The final stretch, the swatching of my favorites. And we're gonna go in the same order that we talked about. This is where that All I Ever Wanted shade is living, by the way. It's not until I start filming a video like this that I realize how many eyeshadow palettes I actually have, because these always take forever to film. But I'm going to have the color story that I was working with, all the swatches, because I know it took 3 arms to swatch all of these out. So I will have them all side by side so we can see the color story together. I clearly have not seen it all put together, but I definitely... like even swatching with just the remaining ones on my arm, I definitely know I had a type. I have a lot of shades similar to this and this, and I have a lot of really beautiful eyeshadows that I selected, and it's primarily a lot of sparkly, shimmery, beautiful things within my collection. So if you want to see any videos using any of these palettes, just leave a comment down below. I will be happy to do so and get some more use out of all of these eyeshadows. Holy smokes. But I hope you guys are doing well. Let me know your favorite eyeshadows in some of your palettes down in the comments. I would love to hear from you, talk to you guys. Maybe we have the same favorites in similar palettes. I'd love to know. Anyway, I will catch you guys in my next video. Until then, I hope you're staying healthy, sane, and safe, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!